This video is made possible by donations to the United States Lighthouse Society from people like you.
So welcome everybody. Welcome to another tour retrospective program. Happy spring. I'm Jeremy D'Entremont, and we've done more than a dozen of these events now, and I think a lot of you have been to most of them or all of them, which is amazing. Thank you. We appreciate your attendance. And because a lot of you have heard me introduce these things too many times, I'm going to keep it pretty short today. We're going to get right into the presentation. You've heard me say the same things over and over again, but for newcomers, I strongly suggest that you check out the US Lighthouse Society's website at uslhs.org to read more about the tours, upcoming tours, and all the other things the Society has to offer. There's too many things for me to talk about right now, but there's a lot there. You might also want to check out the USLHS on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Also the podcast that I host, Lighthearted, US Lighthouse Society podcast, can be heard using any podcast app on a smartphone. It can also be heard by going to the Society's news blog, which is news.uslhs.org. Again, news.uslhs.org. There have been over 120 episodes of the podcast in the last 2 years, and I'm having a blast doing it. So we're always trying to spread the word about that. So today, of course, we're looking back at the Society's 2007 tour to Shetland and Orkney, the two island groups in Scotland. And at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to ask questions. You can do that using the chat. And also we'll explain how to do it, actually speak your questions out loud, but we'll save that for the end of the presentation. You can chat during the program. You can use the chat feature in Zoom to chat with each other or to everyone, but we'll save the questions for the end. And actually, I'm gonna post the map right now, a link to the map. I'll do that right now before I forget. So I'm in the chat, and I just posted a link to the tour map for anybody who doesn't have it. You should be able to click on that and see the PDF of the tour. You can print it if you want to follow along. Can't tell the lighthouses without a scorecard. Again, we're looking at Shetland and Orkney today. Your tour guides will be Skip Sherwood and Jeff Gales. Jeff, as I think most of you know, is the executive director of the US Lighthouse Society, which is based at the No Point Lighthouse in Washington, too far from Seattle, the home of the flying dogs, as you can see there behind Jeff. And Skip Sherwood is a longtime volunteer who has led many tours along with his wife, Mary Lee. And Skip also runs the Society's very popular Lighthouse Passport program. So with that, I think we're about ready to go ahead. Skip and Jeff, if you want to take it away.
Okay, Skip, you ready?
I'm working on it.
Uh-oh.
All right, I'm going to start this off, and seeing how Jeff and I haven't really worked together to set this up, there'll be times when, I'll be saying, take it away, Jeff, or whatever, and that's the way we're going to hand it off back and forth. But anyway, this tour back in 2007, when I started looking back, and I realized this was 14 years ago, and I can't remember what I did yesterday, so it was kind of a challenge to go back and remember a lot of this, but once I did, I remembered what a great and fun tour it was. However, 2 weeks before the tour, wait a minute. This is what happened 2 weeks before the tour. On June 30th, 2007, there was a terrorist attack on the Glasgow airport. And I remember being in the gym on a treadmill looking at this and thinking, crap, we're going there in 2 weeks. And there was a lot of panic. And I know Jeff got some phone calls, and seeing how this is where we were flying into Scotland. But then we decided after a couple of days that usually when something like this happens, then it becomes probably the safest place in the world to go. So it really wasn't, we panicked for a little bit, but then, and the other thing was our hotel was literally across the street from this airport, which, had us a little hinky too, but it all worked out. Now, Jeff's going to talk a little bit about how he and Melissa set this tour up.
Yeah, so this was 2007, and I started, had been with the society for a few years, and before that volunteering, and just starting to get into traveling to see lighthouses, mostly domestically and some international. But this was really a tour that it originated from our desire to try to go to a place the society had never been before. We've been to Scotland before. Of course, we've been all over Great Britain, but we had never been to the northernmost islands of Scotland. And that's how the trip originated. And we worked with a great company in Orkney, who unfortunately is no longer in business, but they did a wonderful job helping us make reservations and what have you. But it was actually my wife, Melissa, for the most part, who created the itinerary. In those days, we were still using real maps, not the computer. And we ended up, I think, putting together a really wonderful trip. I know everybody who was on it remembers this particular tour really fondly. And this was, I think, Skip, this was your second tour with the society, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, it was only the second one. First one was in Maine. This was the second one.
Yeah, so Skip and Mary Lee went to Maine first, and they really went off the deep end and went to the northernmost islands of Scotland. Orkney and Shetland are, I think they're the closest places in mainland Europe to Iceland, if I'm not mistaken. So anyways, from Maine to the Orkney and Shetlands, that's what's the path that Skip took.
Am I ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm ready. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Just a quick overview of how this worked. We flew into Glasgow. We spent a part of a day there, went to Aberdeen, where we took a ferry up to the Shetland Islands. And in the Shetland Islands, we only spent one night there, but the ferry got there first thing in the morning. So we were there almost 2 whole days. And then we took a ferry back to Kirkwall, which is the administrative center of the Orkney Islands, and where Jeff's going to talk a lot about later on about the World Heritage Site there. After we got done there, we went across the Pentland Skerries to Thurso. Well, I should mention in Kirkwall, we spent 7 nights, which on one of these tours is just unheard of. That we would spend that many nights in one place, but that really made it a lot of fun because there was all these islands around here that we were able to access from Kirkwall. Ended up in Thurso, spent a night there, went to Inverness, from Inverness down to Oban to the Isle of Mull and back to Glasgow. So this gives us a general idea of what the tour was in general. Oh, there's Nessie over here. We did go by Loch Ness. The Northern Lighthouse Board manages all the lighthouses in Scotland and on the Isle of Man. And as you go through this presentation, you'll start to see a great deal of similarity between the lighthouses. And that's because virtually all of them were designed by the Stevenson family, which was a very important part of the lighthouse engineers of the Northern Lighthouse Board. Just to give you a quick idea of what that family looked like, the big dog in this whole group is Robert Stevenson, who was the stepson of Thomas Smith, who was the first Northern Lighthouse Board's engineer. And he had 3 sons. One of those had 2 sons. One of those had another son, all of which were Northern Lighthouse Board engineers. Of course, the black sheep of the family was Robert Louis Stevenson, who decided he didn't want to build lighthouses, so he wrote books instead. And as we go through this presentation, I had indicated who the engineers were in designing each of the lighthouses. so you get some idea of just how important this family was. And they have been referred to as the dynasty of lighthouse engineers. 4 lighthouses on the bottom here are actually the 4 of the ones on the Isle of Man that those of you were with us, a few months back, we actually went through those lighthouses. The very first day, the tour began with a trip to Stirling Castle, and I'll let Jeff talk about this.
Sure. And just to add what Skip was saying, we had just read Lighthouse Stevenson's before planning this tour. So we were really wanting to do a tour that talked about that family's dynasty, since they're so important in lighthouse history. So yeah, Stirling Castle, it overlooks the town of Stirling, and it's actually built as part of an extinct volcano. It guards the crossing to the River Forth, and it dates back to the 1500s. It was attacked more than a dozen times over the centuries and served as the seat of Scotland's rulers, including Mary, Queen of Scots. It's now perfectly restored. We actually enjoyed our experience there very much. It shows the residences as they would have been during the reign of Mary's father, James V. And not only did we tour the castle and the gardens, but we actually ate in their cafe, which I remember being awesome. That's all I got.
I was going to have you talk a little bit about that 12.5-hour ferry ride from Aberdeen to Shetland.
So that was one of the, we thought was going to be one of the special parts of this tour. It's not like a cruise ship. It's a passenger, very, very basic cabins, as we came to discover. And it was an overnight ferry. So we didn't realize when we planned the tour, but that stretch of water is not always, but can be extremely rough. And on this particular night, I don't know what the seas were, but they were rocking and rolling. And a lot of people, including Melissa, my wife, got very ill. It actually was one of the first times, actually, I think in Maine, Mary Lee, Skip's wife, and my wife, Melissa, both got sick on a boat ride out of New Hampshire, where Jeremy lives. And they also got sick on this boat ride too. So they became kindred spirits because of their seasickness. But one interesting thing that came out of it is because Melissa all the time, she ended up realizing that if she could concentrate on it, lay down and watch TV in the cabin, which she did, it stopped her from being seasick. So anyways, we learned something about how to cure seasickness, but it would have been better if people didn't get sick. It was a very, very rough ride. Do you remember that, Skip?
Oh yeah, and we had dinner on it, and it was trying to go from where you picked up the dinner to where you sat down at the buffet was pretty rough. So it wasn't like a cruise ship. It's a passenger car ferry, and anybody's been on one of those can get pretty rough.
Yeah, and I remember
Anyway,
the bathrooms in the cabins were really small too. You could barely turn around in the shower. It was fun. It was a great experience, but I'm glad we only spent one night on there.
Yeah, that's for sure. When we get to the Shetland Islands, there's about 100 islands up here, 16 of which are inhabited. It's 240 miles north of Aberdeen, which it's closer to other parts of the mainland of Scotland, but Aberdeen's where we went out of. Population around 24,000. Lerwick is the capital, and the main island is called Mainland. So it doesn't have another name. It's just the main land. And Jeff will talk a little bit here about a couple of the things that we saw there. Here's our bus coming off that ferry. We were very glad to see. We walked off and all stood up on top there and watched our bus roll off because we hadn't seen Jimmy the whole time. We weren't sure he'd actually gotten on the ferry. The first lighthouse we saw is at the entrance to the harbor. This is the lighthouse at Bressay Island. The AY on any of these lighthouses in Scotland indicates it's an island. So anytime you see that AY, you'll know that it's an island. Sometimes it's a tidal island, which is only accessible at certain times of the day. This particular lighthouse is pretty typical of a Stevenson designed lighthouse. It has the tower with the keeper's quarters. A lot of them have this stone wall around it. The light tower, when we were there, was actually operational, but since then they've moved the LED light from the tower to a little auxiliary building with a radar on it. But if you look at this lighthouse and then start watching for the other ones, you'll start seeing the similarity, particularly this color painted on these towers. I don't know, the Stevensons must have had some kind of investment in the company that made that color paint, because they sure used a lot of it. The second lighthouse we went to on this first day we were in the Shetlands was at Sumburgh. This particular lighthouse we got to when it was very, very foggy. The name Sumburgh is really from a Norse word that means South Brock, which actually is a brock is a tower with double walls. So this one is a South Brock, or it's on the south end of the island with double thick walls. Really foggy. And this was probably the best picture we could get of it at that time. Now remember, this is 2007. Here was cleared up a little bit so you could get a picture of the tower. And then here's a picture of what the fog signal looked like back in 2007. But since then, a lot of work has been done on this lighthouse, and I went and got some newer pictures. And here's what the lighthouse looks like today. A lot of restoration's gone on. But the thing that's pretty amazing is this fog signal. This is a directional fog signal. And if you look at up here, you'll see this little track that goes around the top of this tower. So the keeper could point that foghorn in a particular direction, particularly if the fog was thicker in one direction. I'd never seen one of these. Mostly of what we see is, ones that are permanently pointed in one direction, or they have three horns. But this one you could actually move from side to side based on where the fog was. And finally, this is the first time Mary Lee and I had seen puffins, and there were a lot of puffins at around this particular lighthouse. The keeper's quarters there are for rent, and as we go through these lighthouses, you'll see an awful lot of the lighthouses in Scotland have been converted into what they call, what do they call them? Self-catering cottages. Now I'm going to let Jeff talk a little bit about one of the prehistoric sites that we saw when we were there.
Okay. Well, I also wanted to mention real quick about, you mentioned the color of that the Stevensons chose for the lighthouses. I think on this tour especially, I was impressed with not only the level of detail as far as the painting goes and how clean everything was. It was like the inside of these lighthouses, you could literally eat off the floor, but also the Stevensons designed in amazing detail in the air vents and the doorknobs and the hinges and basically downspouts. They used ancient Egyptian symbols and different things of history, and it was such an education to see all of that detail given to these lighthouses when in the United States we don't really have that so much. So that was another reason why I thought that's another reason why I wanted to mention it, because of the how they differ from an American lighthouse experience. Anyways, when we went to this historic site called Jarlshof, and it presents thousands of years of human settlement in the same location, starting with the Neolithic people that settled in Shetland around 2700 BC. And then there were discoveries on the site from the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. There are Norse longhouses or remnants of them, a medieval farmstead, and there's a lord's house dating back from the 1500s as well, all within walking distance of the Sumburgh Head Lighthouse. you want to talk about Scalloway Castle yet, Skip? Or
Wait a minute. Sorry.
that's okay.
I guess I thought I had a slide here for it, but I don't see it. Go ahead.
Okay, so we also saw Scalloway Castle. It's one of the 2 castles constructed in Shetland. It was the home of Patrick Stewart, Earl of Orkney, and the Shetland. He was not a nice guy. He was notorious for his oppression of the Shetland people, including their forced labor in building the castle's 1599 construction. It was built in 1599. And he was eventually executed in Edinburgh in 1615. So great castle, but not a nice guy.
This, I'm gonna let Jeff talk a little bit about this.
The
This is
hotel?
like Jeff was saying, this is only the second tour we took with the society, and the place we stayed in Glasgow was, I think, a Holiday Inn, and was very fancy and all this kind of stuff. And then when we got to the Shetlands, this was the first hotel, and I thought, oh boy, I think the party's over. But actually, it turned out pretty cool. But Jeff, you want to mention a little bit about what we did here?
Yeah, so the Busta Hotel actually is a very nice hotel, beautiful place, wonderful restaurant, full bar, as you can see. It was formerly the home of the Gifford family of Shetland. The earliest part of the house was built in 1588, but the house and family only really gained prestige and wealth in during the 18th century. Many tragedies befell the family, including the loss of all 4 sons in a boating accident. And afterward, the Giffords were approached by Barbara Pitcairn, who told them that she had been secretly married to their eldest son and was expecting his child. There's a reason why I'm telling you this. Basically, the family considered it an unacceptable match, and they wouldn't acknowledge her, but they took the son in as their family heir. She saw him only once more, and then she died young. And it's said that she haunts the lighthouse, haunts the hotel, and is seen frequently by guests. And so when we heard that, we thought that's a perfect place to put Lighthouse Society members.
While we were there, that evening these 2 young men showed up playing the fiddle and the guitar, and it was very entertaining, very cool Scottish type music, lots of dancing going on. And then for those of you that know Glenn Tart, he at one time was helping, who was he? Steve Valder collect beer labels. And this was a gold mine for him. Of course, you always have to drink all the beer in order to get the labels. And Glenn was always caught going upstairs with the empty bottles so he could soak the labels off. And this was a picture of the 6 brands of beer that were made by this one Orkney brewery. So Glenn will remember that very well.
And isn't this the trip where we discovered the beer called Skull Splitter?
Oh yeah, that's coming up.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. That's
I ruined
right.
it. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
There were 2 other small lights on in the Shetlands up there that I just want to mention real quickly for a couple of reasons. The Fugla Ness lighthouse, which is this one up here on the top on the right, and you can see where it was located at the corner of this particular bay. The interesting thing here was we were driving by it, and Roy, who was the guide that was hired to take us around Shetland, said that, well, we're not going to stop here. That's just a cement block with some kind of a light on it. Well, little did he know what he was dealing with. And the whole bus came unglued and started hollering at him. And of course, they ended up having to stop so we could at least get a photograph of it. So he really didn't have any idea that this, was a decent, actually lighthouse. We've stopped for a lot less than that, believe me. The other one, which is called Firth's Bow, was a Stevenson lighthouse. I put this one on here because it's got a croft house on it. In Scotland, if you're not familiar with it, they have 70,000 what are called croft farms. And these are like tenant farmers who farm that particular land. The tenant is actually called a crofter, and they live in these stone homes, which are called croft houses. And this particular picture was just perfect for what you might expect to see in Shetland with the sheep and the croft house, not so much expecting to see, you know, a lighthouse. So these two, again, not major lighthouses, but each kind of with an interesting story to go with it. The second day we were in Shetland, we stopped at the Sheerness Lighthouse. This one sits on a pretty high cliff. Incidentally, under each of the lighthouse names, I have these two, that should be a foot, not 199 inches. 40 foot is the tower, 199 is the focal plane, which obviously means that this thing sits on a pretty high cliff. But a couple of things about this lighthouse. First of all, this is one of the later lighthouses. You notice it was built in 1929. The tower is not round. It's more square. It only had a single keeper home, which was unusual for Scottish lighthouses because most of them had 2 or 3 keepers. So you would have multiple buildings for that. And actually, this is the last Stevenson lighthouse that was built in Scotland, in an area that's referred to as the Wild West of Scotland. And this is why, and looking right outside the door of this lighthouse, this is what you see. The view was phenomenal. As you can see, there are absolutely no trees. Well, the reason there's no trees is because the wind always blows, and there would never be a tree would never survive up here. But there are a few lighthouses that probably have many more spectacular locations than this. It's now a safe, there's a picture of me and Glenn. My hat blew off several times, and Roy, the guide, was running around here like a chicken with his head cut off because he was afraid we were getting too close to the cliffs and we were going to get blown over. But you can't, you know how our group is. We don't listen to anybody like that. This sign was inside.
I'm sorry, the more he told people to stay away from the cliffs, the more they approached them.
Absolutely. The place is a self-catering rental again, and we found this sign inside. We still haven't figured out exactly what it means. It's, but it's saying, would guests please ensure that all foodstuff, for example, potatoes, are fully digested before going down the toilet. We really don't even know what that means, but but you can imagine. And the other thing I like to mention about this one is that in 1999, a gal by the name of Sharma Krauskopf purchased this particular lighthouse and lived there for a number of years. And while she was there, she wrote a book called The Last Lighthouse, which was about the time she spent there. And if you look back in some older issues of Lighthouse Digest, she wrote a series of articles called Light Reflections that are really interesting, talking about what it's like living in a place like this where the wind is blowing all the time. And can you imagine what it must be like up there in the winter when the wind is blowing? So if you ever get a chance, look up an old issue of Lighthouse Digest on the internet and read some of her light reflections.
She's a member of the society also, Scott.
When we left the Shetlands, you crossed down towards Orkney and you passed Fair Isle, which has 2 lighthouses on it, both built in the same year. David and Charles Stevenson, these were sons of Alan Stevenson. And here's a picture of Fair Isle North. And again, notice the focal plane on this is 262 feet. So that thing's pretty high up in the air. What happened here is that we were afraid that this ferry wasn't going to go close enough to the island for us to get some good, decent pictures. And so Darlene Chisman and Holly and a couple other women went up and talked the captain into actually changing direction slightly here so that we could actually go closer to the island, which is pretty amazing. After that, I figured Darlene could do anything. If she could get a captain to change the direction of his ship, There's a picture of the South Island. So you can see we got fairly close to be able to get these pictures on that particular day. Fairly tall tower. It's not a range light. You know, one light's there because when you come from the south, you'll see it, and coming from the north, you see the other one. But you can see this is probably, well, not probably, it's supposedly the most remote inhabited island in England. It's only 3 miles long, about a half a mile wide, but actually 60 people live on this lighthouse. And unfortunately, and despite its remote location, there were 3 members of the keepers' families got killed on this station during German air raids in World War II. Then we came to Orkney, which is a series of about 70 islands, 20 of which are inhabited. The mainland here is again called the mainland, with the administrative capital being Kirkwall. This one was inhabited for thousands of years and colonized by Norway, eventually becoming part of Scotland like the Shetland, but has some of the oldest and best preserved Neolithic sites in Europe, which Jeff will talk a little bit about later. One thing that I found interesting about the Orkneys is that they, using wind, waves, and tides, they generate all their own electricity. As a matter of fact, they sell some to the Great Britain grid, but they still have 130% of what they need. Of course, we only got 20,000 people. I guess maybe it's a little easier to do that, but that makes it literally totally green. An idea of the lighthouses here. Well, first of all, I'm going to mention a couple of things. Scapa Flow is this area right here. A flow is a bay. This is probably considered to be the largest natural harbor in the world. And it, for years, thousands of years, the Vikings used it for their longboats, but during World War I and World War II, this was the main naval base for the British Navy. And so, and became kind of popular at the end of World War I. They had all the German warships in this flow while they were trying to figure out what to do with them at the end of the war. They sat there for about six or 7 months. Finally, the German admiral decided he didn't want to wait around anymore, and he didn't want the British getting these ships. So they started scuttling and sinking all of these ships. The British Navy tried to stop them, but 53 ships actually ended up getting sunk in this bay. And it was interesting that 9 German sailors actually died in this process and were considered to be the last casualties of World War I because it happened 7 months after the end of the war. Jeff's going to talk a little about the Churchill barriers here in a minute. Down here is what's called the Pentland Firth. Now, a firth is usually refers to as a narrow inlet or an estuary, but here it actually refers to this as a strait that sits between the Orkney Islands and the mainland. What happens here is the North Atlantic actually flows through this firth up into the North Sea, but when it ebbs back through the firth, it sets up a series of races and eddies and whirlpools and makes it extremely rough navigating through this particular area. Right here on this little island right here, down, I clicked it up there, but down here, this is called the Pentland Skerries, and there is 2 lighthouses there we'll mention in a minute. But there are a series of lighthouses in this whole area down here that guard Scapa Flow or guide you through the Pentland Firth. The 2 northernmost lighthouses are up here at North Ronaldsay and Start Point. The Brock of Bressay is on the western part of the island. There are 3 in this particular area that guide ships into Kirkwall. There are a number of lighthouses in Scapa Flow. And then down here on the Pentland Firth, you have these lighthouses that come through here. And this was kind of the main part of the tour, was getting to all these particular lighthouses. We also saw an awful lot of attractions in this Kirkwall area of Orkney, which Jeff's going to talk about here. Pretty much some of them right off the bat. But let's let you start with this one here, Jeff.
Sure, that's our hotel, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, I remember. Before we move on, though, to this, I just wanted to loop back to something I remembered that was important about the Shetland that made an impression about me. It's there were no trees. And so how did they live and survive? Well, they had these peat bogs. And I remember seeing this acres and acres of basically peat that they would use for so many purposes, including they would burn it in their homes for heat, obviously in place of trees. And one of our excursions, we went to go visit an original hut from, the historical hut that they used to live in, where they actually were still burning a peat fire. And I was surprised about how smoky and unhealthy that environment was in that house. It was just something that, today we wouldn't even think about living in, but it was a necessity back then. But I thought the peat and the peat bogs were important to mention. So anyways, as Skip was saying, we got to Kirkwall. And one of the great things about this tour was the fact, and we can't reiterate this enough, for those of you who've traveled with us and switched hotels every night or every 2 nights, it can get old very quickly. So this one was a real luxury to be in the same hotel for 7 consecutive nights. And it was called the Air Hotel. The Air is a family managed hotel that has been serving travelers for hundreds of years in the town of Kirkwall, where it's an easy walk to all the local attractions like St. Magnus, which is, I'm supposed to talk about St. Magnus. It's Britain's most northerly cathedral, whose construction began way back in 1137. The hotel is also convenient to all the local shops, where we, all of us, found an abundance of ice cream, specifically the Orkney ice cream, which is still to this day my favorite, which has an amazing, unique flavor that comes from the cows who graze on the special Orkney grass. There's really nothing like it. And I don't think you can get Orkney ice cream here. You have to go to Scotland in order to get it, but it's worth a trip just for the ice cream, right, Skip?
Especially the J. Gow rum soap raisin ice cream.
There you go.
Which is the locally produced rum, is the J. Gow rum, I think named after some old pirate. Okay, I did want to mention this picture in the lower right-hand corner. When we first got to this hotel, a couple of us, in the afternoon, because we had extra time because of how long we were there, which made it really nice. We'd have a happy hour, and start out with 2 or 3 of us, and then 4 or 5 of us, and then the hotel people. There was a bar at the hotel, but they set this place up for us and gave us ice and the whole bit. And Glenn even had a country western CD, and they brought in a CD player, and so we had music, and this turned into a regular afternoon affair, which was made very nice by the people at the hotel.
And I remember at that hotel, they had, such an old hotel. They had very strange designed rooms that were probably not rooms in the past, but there are rooms now. And every room had a sign in it that said to crack the bathroom door open when you take a shower or you use the bath. And we all thought, what the heck's that all about? Well, sure enough, when you didn't do that, you ended up setting off all the fire alarms in the hotel. And I can't tell you how many times we evacuated because our members weren't listening or reading the signs. So I thought that was funny.
Wow. Scott Auerbach was the first one to set it off, and he didn't know what he'd done. It was very interesting. There was an optional tour that was taken to these 3 lighthouses the next day, optional because they could only take a certain number. We were going to go out on a rib, one of those rigid inflatable boats. And we thought, oh boy, this is going to be like an e-ticket ride out here in the open water and everything. And when we got down there, it turned out that something was wrong with the ribbon. We had to take this boat. And as it turned out, we were pretty happy that we got the boat, because it would have been a pretty rough ride out there, because it did take a while to get out there. Here's our merry band of travelers for our 3-hour tour down here. And you can see, by the way, you got to remember, it's the middle of July. So you can see how we're dressed to get some idea of what the temperature was like, especially once you got out on the water. And we took off in this boat, and while we were headed out to Copensea, which is the first lighthouse we went to out here, there was this little rib running along beside us here with some kid driving along, and we thought, well, this is kind of interesting, you know, wonder what he's doing. Well, when we got there, we found out what he was doing. He was our ride from the boat to get to the island, because the boat couldn't land at the island. So they took us in. This young man, who was the son of the captain, and he didn't even tell us that it was his son until we got there. And he took in 4 or 5 people at a time in this little boat, you know, ran it up on the shore and allowed us to get out. So at least we figured out why that boat was coming with us. And then when we got there, of course, as it turned out on a lot of these islands, it was pretty good hike up that island. And I think anytime you see one of these yellow slickers, that's either Phil or Mary Borkowski, because we could always tell it was one of them because of what they were wearing. But you got up to the top of it. This is what it looked like from down below. And again, we were at sea level, obviously, in the boat. And the focal plane of this lighthouse is 259 feet, which gives it a pretty long range and a pretty good hike up to the top of this hill. Again, the lighthouse itself was a typical Stevenson lighthouse, and like Jeff said, the attention to detail on some of these towers is pretty amazing. One of the things I should point out here, although this was not the first one that they used it on, they used these diagonal window panes in virtually all the Scottish lighthouses after about 1790 or 1800. They found out that it made the windows stronger, and also it interfered less with the light as it was shining out. But again, looking very closely, you can see a lot of the lighthouses always have this type of design around the doors and the windows. We left there and we were going to go by Oscary Lighthouse here and just get a photo from the water, but the captain of the boat called the people who own the island. It's a private island. They farm there. They have a sheep herd, and asked if it was okay if we could come on the island. They said, sure, come on. So we went and got off and walked over to the lighthouse. They were happier in hell to see us because they didn't really get a whole lot of visitors out there. And so this lighthouse, again, typical of almost looks like, the tower looks almost like the one at Copensea, except obviously it's taller. A lot of seals at on the beach there that helped. They weren't exactly greeting us; they were all asleep. And then later on, I think it may have been either when we were approaching the Orkneys or leaving, I was able to get this photo of this same lighthouse at night, or at least early in the evening. But we were again able to actually access it on this particular day. This is a very low-lying island, if you can tell, with the focal plane and the height of the tower being exactly the same. You can be sure that that tower is pretty much right at sea level. The third lighthouse we got to see here at Helllar Holm. Again, we thought we'd only be able to get kind of a drive-by shooting here, but instead he actually landed over here, and we were able to walk up and get a look inside this lighthouse. This one was in pretty bad shape. The birds had taken over kind of the inside, and it was a real mess. I understand it's still not in very good shape, but Once again, the tower with the separate buildings, again, with all these decorative kinds of things around the windows. I'm going to let Jeff take over here a little bit. He's got quite a bit to talk about here, but starting with what were called the Churchill barriers was one of the things that we visited on the mainland part of Orkney here, which are in Scapa Flow.
Sure. So the Churchill barriers are an amazing feat of engineering, really. They are a series of causeways linking South Ronaldsay to the Orkney mainland. They were constructed during World War II to prevent the passage of German submarines into Scapa Flow, and they used which British were using as a naval base then. And the barriers are named after, obviously, Winston Churchill, who ordered them to be constructed. The Royal Navy used the sheltered natural harbor throughout World War I, and in the years leading up to the Second World War. The anchorage was defended by block ships that, as Skip mentioned, were intentionally sunk to block the passage between the islands, and also by submarine nets. So it was a blockade of sunken ships and connected by these nets. The causeways contain a total of 500,000 cubic yards of rock and over 300,000 tons of concrete and stretch 1.5 miles. It's amazing to stand on the curving barriers and realize just how much effort went into their creation. And if you look out into the sheltered water of the flow, you can see the rusted bits of sunken ships poking above the surface of the water. It's a really sobering sight. I think, Skip, do you remember the way that looked with all those ships kind of poking up out of the water? It was kind of sad, actually.
Well, it just looked like a graveyard.
Yeah, ship graveyard. Anyways, now do you want me to move on to the chapel? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so during World War II, over 500 Italian prisoners were brought to the Orkney Islands, and they erected the deceptively simple place of worship now known as the Italian Chapel. There's a slide up there of it. Brought there to build the Churchill barriers, the Italian prisoners were allowed to construct their own church, but were not given a wealth of materials. They joined 2 large tin enclosures. One of them used to be a camp rec room, and the prisoners made a long chapel. On the front, they built a wooden facade that gave the church a more austere appearance, almost like a Hollywood set. And inside the tin huts, the sloped walls and ceiling were painted to look like they were made of stone, adorned with classical reliefs and frescoes. The chapel was most recently restored in the 1990s, and it is an amazing sight to behold, knowing the history behind its creation. I know when I walked through the front doors, it was jaw-dropping how much detail was put into that. Do you remember that, Skip?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then do you want me to talk about Highland Park now or wait?
No.
Okay. I'll wait.
You need to start talking about the standing stones of Stennis.
Okay. Oh, that's the next slide. Sure. So next slide, standing stones of Stennis. At more than 5,000 years of age, the enormous stones of Stennis may be the earliest henge monument in the British Isles. And we're talking so old that they predate Stonehenge. They consist of 4 upright stones, and they're part of a circle that was originally 12. They date back to the 3rd millennia BC. I'm sorry. And then in addition to that, we have the rings of Brodgar. Is that the next slide you have?
Yeah, you ready for that?
Yeah, I don't have much more about the standing stones of Stennis.
Well,
So,
I just wanted to point out I was there holding some of them up.
That's right. Right. Well, and we found it fascinating. I mean, just that one fact that they predate Stonehenge. and these are the types of stones that they don't have barriers around them. There's no guards, there's no gift shop. There's no I don't think there's anybody else there when we were there. And you could literally walk right up to them and touch them and experience the stone circle, at least what was remaining. It was really a magical experience to be around those stones of Stennis. And the next one, the Ring of Brodgar, which date back, as I said before, to the 3rd millennia BC. It's a massive stone circle, originally consisting of 60 stones, and only 36 survive today. And with at least 13 prehistorical mounds and a large rock cut ditch surrounding the stone circle. And there's one more thing I wanted to just mention. It's a little bit, it's a story. We didn't necessarily see this, but it's it used to be part of the circles or in connection to them. And to me, it touches on, lighthouses and the lenses in America, how the powers that be for many years were just crushing them and destroying them. But I'm referring now in Scotland to the Odin stone. And that particular stone that was dated back to 3000 BC was, it had a hole in the center, and it was located close to the standing stones of Stennis. And in 1814, so it was basically one of the stones, and it was a special one because it had this hole in the center. And in 1814, excuse me, a man who leased the land on which the stone stood, his name was Captain Mackay. He waged an attack on the Stennis megaliths. At one time, the Odin stone and the circles of Stennis and Brodgar still played a major part in common Orcadian tradition. But because the large number of people visited the ancient sites regularly, they were not happy with what Mackay was doing. And he said the stones were ruining his land. And so he set out to tear down the stones. And it infuriated everybody. And unfortunately, he started to pull them down. And on Christmas Day, 1814, a local historian in Kirkwall heard of Mackay's plans and involved the law. But by this time, he had already toppled one of the standing stones and literally obliterated the second. He began with the Odin stone, which he destroyed in December of 1814, and he using the stone fragments to construct a cowshed. And then the main portion of the stone, the hold segment, survived actually into the 1940s and had been used as an anchor for a horse-powered mill shaft. But then unfortunately came the day that the mill owner's son decided to tidy up and remove the old machinery, and unable to move the large stone segment and ignorant about its history, he ended up smashing it to dust. So we almost were able to save it, but we didn't. But I thought the ignorance of not realizing the history of the Odin stone kind of related to the ignorance of not knowing what we had with the Fresnel lenses. And I think we have one more slide on the scale house.
Oh, I found this on the internet. This is
okay.
a postcard view of that ring of Brodgar, and gives you a pretty good idea of what that looks like, from the air. Of course, we wandered around it down here. I think, we need to have you talk a little bit about the Highland Distillery.
Okay, sure. Well, that was one of the highlights of the tour for some of us. And this was the first time that I ever did this. And I was actually told to do it by Wayne Wheeler, our president emeritus. He said that if you go to a local distillery, buy a case of whiskey, you'll be able to use it to gently convince lighthouse attendants to let you in. And it actually worked really well. I mean, we ended up giving away, I think we bought 2 cases of whiskey from this place. We ended up giving away just about all of it. Of course, some of it ended up with us and we were having it at dinner and what have you. But Highland Park has an interesting backstory. And we all know the history of the moonshiners in American history. Well, the Highland Park is the Scottish version of moonshining in America. It's the northernmost distillery in the world. And because of the harsh climate that far north, the Orkneys windswept landscapes are treeless, as we mentioned before. Distillers say that this terrain plays into the Highland Park's distinctive flavor, rich with the scent of local heather flower. The whiskey is made with the aromatic hand-cut peat. And aromatic is definitely a nice word to put for the peat odor aroma. It's one of only 7 distilleries that still turn malt by hand, and the water used in Highland Park is drawn from a natural spring, which is located near the distillery in Orkney. And I think most of these famous distilleries and breweries, a lot of them were in the location that they are in Europe because of the access to a special water source. The company's youngest kiln is only 100 years old. That's the youngest one. And the peat core dates back over 4,000 years where they get their peat. And it was a great tour. Unfortunately, we were there on a day that, or a week that they were partially closed for renovations. So those of us who went for the tour only got a very short experience, but it was worth the a trip to see it and to understand more about the Highland Park whiskey process.
This is your last one here. This is the Scarab Brae.
Okay, great. So Scarab Brae, one of the most perfectly preserved Stone Age villages in Europe, which was covered for hundreds of years by a sand dune on the shore of the Bay of Scale, mainland Orkney. Exposed by a great storm in 1850, 4 buildings were excavated during the 1860s, and after another storm in 1926, further excavations were undertaken by the Ancient Monuments branch of the British Ministry of Works. During the 1970s, radiocarbon dating established the settlement was inhabited from about 3200 BC. In 1999, as part of the Heart of Neolithic Orkney, Scarab Brae was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, along with Maeshowe and the 2 ceremonial stones we just talked about, the Stones of Stennis and the Ring of Brodgar. And
Are you there?
What? Yeah. Okay. Now, sorry about that. The next slide's of the scale house. This was actually part of the experience in that area. It's considered the finest 17th century mansion in Orkney, and it was originally built in 1620 and was home to a man who, it was actually home to the man who unearthed Scarab Brae in 1850. The house was opened to the public in 1997 after a careful restoration and features artifacts such as Captain Cook's dinner service, Neolithic Iron Age finds, historical paintings, original furniture, and many other interesting items collected by the families who lived there. And it also, for the future, anybody wants to go there, it offers 4-star self-catering accommodation apartments.
4-star.
4-star. That's right.
Wonderful. On this same day, later in the afternoon, we went to the only lighthouse of that day, to what's called the Broch of Bressay. And again, when something ends in AY, it's an island, and so this is actually on a tidal island. Incidentally, the term Broch means a fort, and Bressay is from a Norse word meaning a fort island. So this is a fort island, so it's somewhat redundant in the name. This was a pretty good hike, as you can tell here. We started over here. This is where our coach let us off, and we had to cross this area right here, which when the tide was low, and it's only low for a couple hours, so timing was very important here. And I can tell you, walking across this, and if you see this green moss type of growth right here, made it extremely slippery and wet. And then when you got over here, then you're looking up and saying, oh, there's the lighthouse. So not only are you crossing this, you have to climb up and then get up to the top of the hill. So it was a pretty good height to get to that lighthouse. On the way, we passed some ruins of a Viking settlement. But when we got to the top of the lighthouse, to the top of the hill, realized that the lighthouse was really very short, only 36 feet tall for the tower. But again, a focal plane in this case of over 170 feet, showing you that at the top of this island, the top point on the island is where they built that lighthouse. And you can kind of see here from this picture, if you looked over the edge of the cliff there, that's what you were looking down on. And here's a closer up view of this particular small lighthouse. I'm not sure where the keepers were in this particular situation, whether there was a keeper's house here. There must have been, because they couldn't really get back and forth across that tidal area every day, multiple times. When we the one thing I wanted to get to here, as mentioned, the Pentland Skerries, and the reason we got this picture is because we went back down to that area on what's called South Ronaldsay, so that we could get a photo of the Pentland Skerries before we went to Maze Howe on this particular day. And there are actually two lighthouses here. It's really a high and a low lighthouse. The low lighthouse, the lantern is now gone. The island it's on is called Muckle Skerry. The term muckle in Scotland means large, and skerry means island. So basically this means it's a large island with a pretty tall tower. But if remembering back to the importance of the lighthouses on this little island as people try to enter, as the ships enter into the Pentland Firth and then eventually into Scapa Flow. On this particular day, things had gotten turned around. So instead of going to North Ronaldsay, which we were supposed to do, we went to Stromness, and then we went to Maze Howe, which is another part of the Orkney World Heritage Site. And I'll let Jeff talk a little bit about Maze Howe.
It's one of the greatest Neolithic tombs and extremely impressive. It was built about 5,000 years ago, so it's not very old. And it predates the pyramids of Egypt, actually. The structure sits amongst farmland in Stennis and forms part of what Skid said, the Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site, and is linked to the great ceremonial stone circles nearby, the same ones we just talked about, Stennis and Brodgar. Very little is known about the purpose of Maze Howe. It was presumably used to house the bones of the dead, but only a trace of bone was found during a 1861 excavation. The only thing that does seem certain is the alignment of the tomb, and that it was used as a possible calendar. At sunset on Midwinter's Day, the sun shines down the length of the entrance passage and illuminates an area low on the rear wall of the main chamber. So it suggested that if you're living this far north, knowing exactly when the days are going to start getting longer again is a very important piece of information. And when you're climbing around inside there, everybody wanted to come back to see that event of the light shining in. And I haven't made it back, but hope to someday.
If I remember right, in order to be able to be part of that group that actually gets in there on that day, it was a lottery that you had to put your name into. And we were laughing, I remember, because Jeff and I said, well, it'd be just our luck that we'd get into the lottery and then it would be real cloudy that day and the sun wouldn't even shine in there. So the next day we were able to take our trip up to North Ronaldsay, which is the northernmost island in the Orkneys. This was about 2.5 hour ferry ride from Kirkwall. And a couple of things about North Ronaldsay. It's the home of the North Ronaldsay sheep, which is kind of a unique breed for wool and food. And the fact that these sheep actually live on seaweed or brown kelp, and they roam the beaches here eating this brown kelp, and they're called feral sheep because they just wander all over the place. But the islanders have built these walls. This wall goes all the way around the island, and in fact keeps the sheep from coming inland and keeps them out here eating that brown kelp. And if once a year they have a festival, and you can actually join this festival as a volunteer, and they rebuild the wall, or they build the parts of the wall that have been knocked down. There's a lot of drinking and partying, but during the day, they actually rebuild this wall. And if you go to this website, it's NR for North Ronaldsay Sheep Festival, you can find out all about the festival. I thought, now that would be a lot of fun to attend.
Yeah, it's the only place in the world that has kelp-eating sheep on this little island of North Ronaldsay. And I read that they once tried to relocate the sheep to other parts of Europe, but they never survived. It's something about that kelp, that island, and these sheep that are special. So
the oldest lighthouse that we were able to actually, visit was this lighthouse called the Dennis Head Old Beacon, which was the third lighthouse built in Scotland in 1789, which was only a couple of years after the establishment of the Northern Lighthouse Board. And Thomas Smith, who was the stepfather of Robert Stevenson, the two of them were the ones that designed this. The lighting system was oil burning lamps with reflectors, but the problem was the light was really weak. And it was said that the light was often mistaken for a shepherd's lantern, which obviously means it wasn't really very strong. And in 1806, it was replaced by the lighthouse that we'll go to a little bit later at Stark Point. And in 1809, they capped it off, and they put this stone ball at the top, which is actually 8 feet in diameter, and they actually retained the tower as a day marker. Today, it's still the best example of an old lighthouse in Scotland, and they are trying to restore it. Here's a better example of the close-up of the tower. You can actually see the new one in the background there. I caught this one. This is off the internet. They are actually trying to restore this thing to something more like it was originally. Unfortunately, they ran out of money. And fortunately for us, this scaffolding was not around it when we were there. The other lighthouse that was built there later on, they found out that they still needed a tall lighthouse in this particular area. And this one was designed by Alan Stevenson, which was Robert Stevenson's son. This one is the tallest land-based lighthouse in the British Isles at 138 feet for the tower, and of course being almost at sea level with the focal plane 141 feet. If I remember right, I think this is the first one that we were actually able to climb, and we climbed 176 steps, and then through some ladders, 23 more steps. So it was 199 steps to the top of this lighthouse. It was a really impressive one for being something that was built in 1854. The striping on it was added later on, with the 2 white bands were painted over the original color of the sandstone that it was built out of. But again, the detail around the lantern room up here, as Jeff talked about before, was pretty impressive. When we were at the top of that lighthouse, you got a really good view of the old lighthouse down here and some of those barriers that are built around to keep the sheep out.
And can you go back? Can you go back to that slide real quick? Skip. Sorry. I just want to, everybody, I want to point out, look at that sky in those pictures and the sun. And we were so lucky with the weather on this tour. This is actually, I think, one of the first ferry rides that could make it out to North Ronaldsay in a month because of the weather had been so bad. So I just wanted to throw that in there, that we were extremely lucky with the sun being out almost every day.
Yeah, we actually did have to change the itinerary so that, because the day before when we were supposed to go here, they couldn't. And that's when we went to Mays How instead and were able to go on this day. And you're right. I mean, the weather turned out to be fantastic. And because, again, all of these areas is so windy that sometimes, these ships or these boats just, couldn't make it, on these small trips. The next day we took this little thing, which was called the Roving Eye, out of Stromness to go around Scapa Flow. There are two lighthouses on this island right here called Hoi Low and Hoi High, which is a range light that gets you into Scapa Flow. And here is what it looks like when you get a view of both of them. The one tower pretty tall at 108 feet tall, the other one relatively short. You can see some of the remnants of the wartime armaments that were actually built at the low lighthouse. And the high lighthouse, Jeff was talking about some of the interesting things you find at these lighthouses that the Stevensons worked in. This design down here is actually a design from an Assyrian temple to give it a totally different look. So while the towers, if you look at these towers, they all look alike, at the lantern room level and everything, but very often it's the design of the buildings on it that give it quite a bit of its own unique features. There is a small lighthouse on an island called Cava here, which again marks that island so you don't run into it in this bay. And then there's the Barrel of Butter, which is a kind of like a pile of rocks. There's actually a small island here, but it really looks like a rock pile with this little lighthouse on it. That really isn't one I would have normally included, but the story behind its name of the Barrel of Butter is that the townspeople of this town right here called Ophir, in fact, would pay the lord of the land around here a fee each year so that they could hunt the seals that hung out on this bunch of rocks out here. And the fee was a barrel of butter. That's what it cost them to be able to hunt those seals. Hence the name Barrel of Butter. When we were there, we thought we were going to be looking at something that looked like a butter barrel, but it really didn't. The other lighthouse in this area at Cantic Head, again, fairly typical with the tower with the same look, but the buildings around it, again, being, one of the top features. This one is, again, another self-catering lighthouse, costs about 140 pounds a week, 140 pounds a night to stay here. But this actually marks that southern entrance to Scapa Flow. Here's a better, more up-close version of it. And one of the things that from this photo, I couldn't figure out what this was over here, so I looked some stuff up. And what it is, it's actually a sundial that they use to tell time at this particular lighthouse. The next day, we went to Start Point. Remember I said that the Start Point Lighthouse replaced the North Ronaldsay Lighthouse, which was up here before they, again, built the second Ronaldsay Lighthouse. Took our same boat to Start Point. This one took, I can't remember how long this took, but it wasn't quite as long, but at least an hour and a half to get there. Start point is on an island, just like a couple of the other ones that we were at, and had this, it's a tidal island. This notice is there, you know, again, be careful when you cross. This gentleman right, this guy right here and this gentleman right here were actually part of the guides that helped us walk across here. I think that's Roger Nelson there, getting, you know, watching where he's walking there. Mary Lee, again, this is extremely slippery, and you had to be very careful. I think that's Grant there, and I think that's, he's carrying his lunch. I'm not sure why. Sorry. The original lighthouse on this island was just one that they burned a fire at the top of it, so it never really had a lantern room. But the lighthouse itself is pretty distinct because it's the only one in Scotland that has this particular markings. This one was there again. Remember, the old Ronaldsay Lighthouse was built in around 1789. So this one wasn't much longer than that. You know, after that, built in 1806. The black and white vertical stripes weren't really added until 1915, which makes it a very recognizable day mark. And like I said, it's the only one in Scotland that's painted this way. Because of, again, Jeff's influence, we were able to climb this one to get up and see the lens. And then, of course, everybody was able to get up on the top and hang over the edge. And like I said, we really didn't get to climb that many. So this was pretty much a treat. We left.
And we couldn't have done that. I'm sorry, Skip. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say we couldn't have made that trip if the weather wasn't good either. I mean, can you imagine trying to cross that tidal area, and even if it was windy? We got extremely lucky again.
It sort of reminds me, those of you who ever been in North Head, or not North, the East Quaddy Lighthouse in Canada,
right, where
you have to climb down a ladder and then cross the, you know, where the tide comes in, and you only have a short period of time to do that. But it's flat out dangerous to walk across that. Back to the mainland and into what are called the Scottish Highlands. The Highland area is pretty much the area got circled here. Edinburgh and Glasgow are not part of the Highlands, but this is only 10% of the Scottish population. Inverness being the administrative center, and it's a lot of mountain ranges. And it was kind of nice to get back and see a tree for the first time in about 8 days, because none of the Orkneys or Shetland Islands had trees, as Jeff pointed out, you know, where they burn a lot of peat. This is the area right here that we concentrated on toward the end of the tour, to look at the lighthouses. It started over here at Strathie Point, Holborn Head, Dunnet Head, the Skerries, which we've already talked about, Duncansby, and then Noss Head over here. And there was a lighthouse down here that we didn't go to, but I put it in here because the lighthouse in the middle here was actually built, you know, really much later on to fill the blank dark space between Tarvaness and Noss Head. The first one here up in the upper left at Strathie Point, again, we had to climb up a hill. I believe that's Nancy Dillon climbing up this hill to get to this particular lighthouse, which I found kind of fascinating just because of the, you know, the way it looked. It was like flat buildings, a square tower. It's laid out in a hollow square down here. All the buildings are in, so you've got a U-shaped situation here, and you get in one, and then you don't ever have to get out of it to tend to the light or whatever, which made it a lot, giving it these covered passageways, giving protection from the high winds at this, you know, at this exposed headlands. The traditional round tower was abandoned on this. Again, this thing wasn't built till 1958. One of the things that always costs more money with a circular tower is the furnishings inside very often have to match the, you know, the curvature of the tower. Well, if it's square, it's a whole lot easier to fit things on the interior instead of having the circular tower. This was the one of the last lighthouses built in Scotland, and the first one that was all electric. This was a shot from it, and again, not many trees at this particular point, but again, it's up at the top of that peninsula where the winds are blowing virtually all the time. Then we went to Holborn Head. This one was in pretty bad shape, but when we were there, they were actually it's a private lighthouse now. Some people had purchased it and were renovating it. And I got this picture off the internet. Of course, up on the right, it'd be 2007. This is what it looks like in 2018. We're looking a whole lot better than it did back in 2007. There is a trio of lighthouses around this peninsula that pretty much guide ships into the Pentland Firth and again up the Scapa Flow. Starting down here at Noss Head, we have another one with a pretty high focal plane sitting on the top of a cliff. This one designed by Alan Stevenson. A good example of those diagonal panes in the tower. And again, another typical kind of keepers' homes and equipment buildings. And this is the one, isn't this the one, Jeff, where the castle was next door?
Right. That was the one where the castle next door. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh yeah, this was where there was a castle. Some people that were tired of going to lighthouses actually went to the castle instead.
Yeah, the castle was close to Noss Head.
Well, that's what this is.
Yeah, right.
I'm at Noss Head.
Right, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, don't you have anything to say about the castle?
Oh, Castle Sinclair. Sorry about that. The castle, that's my job, isn't it? The imposing ruins of the once mighty castle cling to the rocky cliffs of Caithness at the southeastern end of Sinclair Bay, near Noss Head. That's where we are, Noss Head, right?
That's right.
Much of the castle's history is shrouded in mystery, but it is speculated that it was built in the late 14th century by the Sinclairs, Earls of Orkney, and later to become the Earls of Caithness. Very little remains of the 14th century castle beyond a few foundation walls. The castle is owned and in the process of being restored by the Clan Sinclair Trust and is the only Scottish castle to be listed by the World Monument Fund as one of the 100 most endangered sites in the world. And I don't think very many of our group went to go see it. I know Melissa did, and I think Holly might have gone to see this, but most of us went to Noss Head, but a few people went to go see the castle.
You want to say anything about the Shetland ponies?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Appearing to roam wild across Shetland, the ponies are in fact all owned and tended by local people. You can spot these ponies grazing on the hills and by the roadside, and they really are adorable and looking, and their personality is very sweet. They're short in stature, obviously, and the Shetland ponies are considered to be the strongest type of horses in existence. They can pull twice their own weight, giving them about twice the power of most heavy horses. For at least 4,000 years, the Shetland ponies have roamed the exposed hills of the moors of Shetland, and this unrestricted lifestyle has led to the evolution of a unique and hardy breed, perfectly adapted to their environment. Obviously, I said Shetland, but they're all over Orkney as well. Shetland ponies were, this is a factoid, Shetland ponies were used in British coal mines, if you didn't know that, from the 19th century because of their strength and their ability to pass through low underground tunnels hauling truckloads of coal. Oh, I didn't realize that horses were ever used in coal mining, but apparently Shetlands were.
Right, there is two more lighthouses up here of interest. The one at Duncansby Head, built in 1924. Again, a fairly high focal plane. but we're getting more now to these square towers and square buildings rather than the circular type of towers. This is the northeasternmost point of Great Britain's mainland. They normally say that the two furthest points apart in Great Britain begins from down at Land's End to John O'Groats, which is not true because the northeasternmost point is here at Duncansby Head Lighthouse. So but John O'Groats got the fame, and that's where all the tourists go. But if you've been to Duncansby and you've been to Land's End, as we were on a tour where we went out to the Isles of Scilly, you've been to the 2 points that are furthest apart on the Great Britain mainland. But again, you notice that they've abandoned at this time in 1924 the towers being the circular type. Before we were there, and I didn't realize this till I was looking some information up about it, the keepers' houses are shown here in a postcard view in the lower right, and above from a picture from the internet. These were actually the keepers' houses, which were gone when we were there in 2007. But you can see that there were substantial, pretty large buildings there to hold 2-3 keepers for this particular lighthouse. Then the last one up on this peninsula was at Dunnet Head. Now look at the focal plane on this one, 344 feet. This one was way up in the air, giving you a great view of the coastline. Again, the buildings were fairly typical, as was the tower. This is where we took our group photo of our merry band of people here. There's your tour guide right there in his younger day. I mean, that was what, 14 years ago. There's Melissa over there. She still looks the same. So he looks a lot older, but not her. There's Michael. Michael, unfortunately, has passed away. His wife, Christy, these are the two that were our primary guides around Orkney and in the Highlands. Jimmy Polk, our bus driver, who all the women just loved. So they found out he was married and had 2 kids. And then, of course, our ever-present photographer, Phil Borkowski, who always manages to set his camera and get back into the photo in time to get himself in it. This is the most northerly point of the mainland Britain, but there was a difference between northernly and northeasternly. So, but this is what it says on the little placard here as being the most northern point of mainland Britain is at this particular lighthouse. Remember, I said there was that one lighthouse that was built on the other coast to light that dark space, but you know, up along that area, and that was this lighthouse built like 1916 with kind of a unique red stripe. So this one, a relatively small one, not unimportant because it did provide light, particularly during World War I is when they built it, so there wouldn't be this dark range between those 2 particular lighthouses. And then we get to virtually the last day, but Jeff wanted to mention the town of Inverness, where we spent our last night before we went back to Glasgow. So Jeff, did you want to say something about Inverness?
I'd love to. But I also want to loop back real quick to Nas Head and just mention that that was one of those special circumstances when we got there. It was only supposed to be a photo op, and a gentleman starts walking down the road. His name was, we found out later, it was Ian Sinclair. He owned the property, and we didn't have to bribe him, although we did give him a bottle of that Highland Park whiskey, and he opened the whole place up for us. And we were able to go into the keeper's dwelling and climb the lighthouse. We couldn't go all the way up because it's still run by the Northern Lighthouse Board, but we were able to get all over that place. And he actually became a member of the society, and he is still to this day living out there, as far as I know. And in addition to that, I remember there was a wonderful maritime museum we visited in the little town right there. And one of the most beautiful Fresnel lenses I've ever seen was in the basement of this museum. It was one of the oldest lenses I've ever seen. It's one of Fresnel's originals, and it is, there probably is none older on display except for at the Fresnel Lens Museum in France. But I always remember that beautiful lens in this little tiny maritime museum in the middle of nowhere in the basement. So, all right. So Inverness. Inverness is the UK's most northerly city, and it actually means mouth of the River Ness. It's the largest city and the cultural capital of the Scottish Highlands. Its old town features 19th century Inverness Cathedral, the mostly 18th century old high church, and an indoor Victorian market. And fun fact, Inverness health officials used to advocate drinking alcohol, actually. During the 1832 cholera outbreak, local health officials recommended to drink strong spirits to keep the disease at bay. And they found, and they've been following the doctor's advice ever since. And we certainly followed the doctor's advice and had lots of alcohol and wine and what have you. And this was the last opportunity for our members and participants to shop. So all of us took advantage of going into town, checking out the markets and everything. And we had a lot of fun that day in Inverness, I remember.
Yeah, that's one thing, you know, that everybody's been on these tours knows how much people like to shop on them. And because of where these lighthouses were located on these remote islands and everything, there were virtually no gift shops except in the major city, you know, like in Kirkwall and Inverness and Aberdeen. So there was, when they finally did hit one of these cities, you know, they pretty much, you know, would go overboard because they were so starved for a gift shop. Well, anyway, going down toward the Isle of Mull, we passed Loch Ness, which is it's the largest largest lake, if you will, by volume in the British Isles, because it's 23 miles long, and at deepest point, it's like 755 feet deep. And of course, it's home to the infamous Loch Ness Monster. It has a speaking of peat, it has a very high peat contact, which makes the visibility in the water very low, which makes it always more difficult when they've always tried to find the Loch Ness Monster. They would always had difficult seeing because the water was so murky because of the peat, and that just adds to the legend. But while we went by there, you know, Jeff took a picture and sent it to me, and he said this is what he had in his picture that he sent to me. So, you know, whether you believe it or not, you got to understand, you know, Jeff Gales. As we came down this way, there is a spot right here between these, you know, in a very narrow gap in these two lochs right here. I keep calling them lochs, but they're lakes. A loch is something different to us. And so they had to build a lighthouse here for the ships finding their way through here. And it was the Corran Lighthouse built in 1860, a relatively short one. This one today has been converted into a vacation rental, and you rent the whole place. It's like about $3,000 a week and sleeps up to 10 people. I was looking up what this cost, and it said it includes all your linen and towels and a lovely welcome hamper. And I'm thinking, why would you put a clothes hamper as a lovely welcome thing? And then I found out that the term hamper in Britain can mean a food basket. So what they were talking about is you get a basket of food. And here I thought, I loved it. It says a lovely welcome hamper. And I thought that would, you know, if you were there for a week, maybe you would use it, but, you know, certainly not something I would say was lovely. On down
also,
to
wait, just interject something, Skip. I'm sorry, just interject that loch actually is Gaelic for lake or other body of water surrounded by land.
Like Loch Lomond.
That's right. As they
The,
say in the song.
We took our last ferry ride from Oban over to the Isle of Mull, primarily to see this lighthouse right here, which is Lismore. There were some minor lights on the way. This was kind of a funky day. If I remember, it was raining to some extent. You can just see by the pictures that the sky was kind of dark, and we were getting kind of the end of the tour. And you know, they always talk about it, you know, you go to Scotland and these places, and on any given day, there's ABC, you know, another bloody castle. Well, it got to the point where it was almost another bloody lighthouse, because they all pretty much, again, started to kind of look alike until, like Jeff said, we started looking for some of the more unique things that you would find. It's just that after a while, they did start kind of looking pretty much alike. But this was an interesting ride over and back for the 10-minute time that we had as they went by the lighthouse, you know, at least going in both directions. And that was basically the last thing we did before we went back to Glasgow for our farewell dinner. But just for a few of the people that are on the tour, see if you remember some of these. This was one of my favorite names for a bar, was the Tilted Wig. I mean, I could just see a bunch of Irish guy or a bunch of Scottish guys in there with wigs on, that after drinking too much and their wigs got tilted. Here's our friend Tom Chisholm, who always carries multiple cameras. So this is, you know, anybody who knows Tom will recognize that. Bunny was actually, I couldn't believe it. She brought a set of bagpipes, and I'm sorry, but she really didn't know how to play them. But she was learning as she went along, and was able to, every once in a while, when we didn't have anything, you know, we were waiting for the bus or whatever, Bunny would put on a show with her bagpipes. This was the beer that we found in the Orkneys called Skull Splitter. At first, I thought it was because the alcohol content on this, I believe, is something around 9%. And that's why they called it Skull Splitter. But actually, there was a Viking named Thorfinn Skull Splitter who lived up to his name by splitting people's skulls, and there's a picture on the you know, the beer itself. And another thing I learned is they have no idea how to make a martini in Scotland. I asked at every bar we went to, and not one of them had a clue. They didn't know what vermouth was, and so I pretty much gave up. But I found this to be true.
I remember standing by a bar at a hotel with Skip in Scotland. He said to the bartender, make me a martini. I don't know what that is. Well, do you have vermouth? Yes. Do you have gin? Yes. Can you mix them together? No. He had to buy 2 separate drinks. They made him buy vermouth.
Yeah, so I had to buy a thing of vermouth and a thing of gin. You know, I said, it's against the law to mix them together. This is my picture of the thinker, our friend Glenn. The most popular thing for the women around Kirkwall was jewelry made by a woman by the name of Sheila Fleet. And here is a picture of a bunch of the gals that all bought Sheila. I mean, they really saw this gang coming, because she really cleaned up with, as you can see, either wearing earrings or necklaces. That's the Sheila Fleet picture. Does she? Diane still buys Sheila Fleet? No. One of the problems at one of these hotels, there was no bar. So this was the bar, which was on the bed in somebody's bedroom. And here's a picture of Phil and Mary. We weren't quite sure what they were doing here. I think it had something to do with Phil changing the film in his camera. At least that's what the story was. There's well, we already seen one of the sheep on Ronaldsea. We saw a few Shetland sheepdogs. This is what is referred to as a Highland cow or a Highland coo, which is a special breed of cow that you find in the Scottish Highlands. And there's that picture of Phil with those Shetland ponies. Here's Phil at the farewell dinner, showed up in his lakekeeper outfit. When we were in Stromness, this guy was wandering around. He's on some kind of stilts. He's a big Scot. He's got his kilt on and everything. And he had this dog. Well, it wasn't really a dog. That was a person inside there. And here is a picture of that individual laying down. But this dog was walking along, and this guy had a squirt gun or something inside of it. And he'd lift his leg, and this squirt would come flying out of there, and just scared the pea Jesus out of Mary Lee. And she's running around thinking this dog actually peed on her, you know. The guy was really putting on a show. It was a lot of fun, you know. This is typical of the kinds of roads that we ran into, like on in Shetland and wherever Jimmy took. We had Jimmy take the bus, and sometimes I was just amazed at how he could navigate these narrow roads. Of course, we can't leave Scotland without a little picture of the dreaded haggis, which they never served this on the tour, but we arrived in Scotland a few days early and went to some place where I ate it, and it wasn't all that bad. But
yeah, but it's worse than haggis, don't you? The
what?
Vegetarian haggis we found.
Now I'm going to leave this with a couple of the quotes from the tour. That along the way, Jeff got hooked on something called Curly Whirly, which is some form of candy bar. And when somebody tried to, take a piece of it, his comment was, "Nobody messes with my Curly Whirly." And so we got to the point where that became a running joke, of Jeff, just hanging on to his Curly Whirly. The first night we were in Scotland, Eva Babick and I went across I remember I said the hotel was right across from the airport, and there was a liquor store in the airport, and we decided, well, that'd be a good place to get some booze before we started the tour. So we went back over there after dinner, and to our dismay, it was closed. And so we asked, there was a convenience store there, and we asked the proprietor there, what time do they open in the morning? Now, you got to do this with a Scottish accent, but this is the way it came out. He said, they open after sex, and Eva and I are looking at each other going, I wonder what time that is. Of course, she was meaning it was after 6 in the morning, but I'll never forget that. And because we just stood there and, looking at each other, trying to figure out, okay. All right, well, that's pretty much it. We can answer any questions, or anybody has anything they'd like to say about what we saw, or in a little bit here, I know some of the people that are on this tour are in the group here. If you want to say something about what your best memory was, I'd like to hear that. I enjoyed this. I've been, I've either led or been on, about 30 society tours, and I'll have to say this is one of the top 2. It was only the second one I ever went on, but the people I met on this one have became our very close friends traveling with for lighthouses. So that's my fondest memory, in addition, of course, to the lighthouses, but it was the people that I met on this particular tour.
We didn't have
Go
we
ahead.
didn't have a book on this one, did we?
No, there was
looked.
the map that Jeremy posted. Mary made, but this was, I think, before she did those journals.
Yeah,
Because I went back to the big stack of them,
I
and
did
I didn't
too.
find one. And Mary told me that no, she didn't make a journal, but they did have a map for it.
I don't know where the race here is.
I thought it was under chat.
It was what?
Hello, it's Linda Rosenblum. I wanted to recommend a book called Scottish Lighthouse Pioneers, because in it is by 2 very famous Scottish authors, Sir Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson, taking the tour that you just described. But it was, I think, Sir Walter Scott took it in 1814, and Robert Louis Stevenson took it in, I think, 1869. So it's very interesting, and it's available it's by Paul A. Lynn, L-Y-N-N, and it's available online. You can find
Very cool.
Looks-
That would be
there's also,
interesting.
I was going to say, there's also the Lighthouse Stevensons by Bella Bathurst, which I think Jeff mentioned, but it's a great book about the Stevenson family. And of course, Robert Louis Stevenson, probably most people know, was the grandson of David Stevenson. So he was about the only man for three generations in that family who didn't design lighthouses, but he did okay for himself. So Jeff has disappeared. I don't know what happened to him, but he's not.
There's another book, you can see this one. It's called The Dynasty of Engineers, the Stevensons and the Bell Rock. Actually, I got this one signed by the Commodore of or the chief executive of the Northern Lighthouse Board when we were there on a tour. It was the tour where we did, the last one we did at Scotland and Northeast England. But that first one sounds fascinating because if they kind of go around the same type of places that we did.
Well, they do, and also the early tour in it, the one that Sir Walter Scott went on, and a lot of people were surprised that Sir Walter Scott actually went on such a potentially rough and voyage, because he was already a wealthy man by that time and very well known, but he was very game. And on that early one, they were also doing a lot of scouting of lighthouse locations and so forth, because a lot of them hadn't been built yet at that time.
I wanted to mention that I just interviewed two people at the Sumburgh Head Lighthouse a couple of weeks ago for my podcast. That'll be on the podcast in a couple of weeks. And I interviewed Brian Johnson, who's an ex-lighthouse keeper and technician there. And in Shetland, he actually looks after the lighthouses in Shetland, and he restored that foghorn at Sumburgh. So that was really interesting to hear about. And I interviewed Jane Outram, who's the manager of the property there too. So, and I looked up, as Jeff was talking about the ice cream, I looked up Orkney ice cream online. I really want to try it, but I found their website at orkneyicecream.com. A lot of good flavors besides the ones you showed, but sadly it is still only available in Shetland, Orkney, and mainland Scotland. So I'm gonna have to go there to eat some. So Jeff was here when you finished the presentation, but he's slipped out on us. Maybe he had who knows, maybe, oh, here he is. He's back in the waiting room. Let me let him back in. Pounding on the door.
I have a question for Jeff. Is he back?
Oh yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat too. I want to ask those, but you can go ahead, David.
What did you pay per bottle for Highland Park in those days?
Well, they bought it by the case, so that would be cheaper.
Well, obviously you're not paying extra. You're not paying.
If I remember correctly, it worked out to be only about $15 per bottle.
Oh my
Or
God.
20, maybe $20 per bottle. And back then I thought that was expensive.
I would have bought 2 cases too at that price. It's about $50 or $60 a bottle now in the States.
Well, yeah, but there have also been a lot of tariffs since then.
Yeah, although they just lowered the tariffs on single malt for those of you who are aficionados. The federal government just lowered the excise tax.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. Somebody asked a while ago, and this I think would be a question for Jeff, if this tour will ever be offered again. Any idea?
Possibly, probably not in the next couple of years, but maybe a little further on down the line. So yes, a distinct possibility will be offered again.
Can we get the muckle flugga?
No.
That's
I want to go there.
The lighthouse on the northernmost part of the Shetlands, which we did not get to.
But we had fun saying its name, Muckle Flugga.
I interviewed Ian Duff, the ex-Scottish lightkeeper. He actually was a keeper at Muckle Flugga. Until you haven't lived until you hear Ian Duff say Muckle Flugga. Outsider Art had a couple of questions in the chat. Why square as opposed to round lighthouse towers, aesthetics, or ease of building, or something else? You kind of talked about that, Skip.
Yeah, it's pretty much the ease of building and the materials. And like I said, if you've ever been when you're inside of a circular tower, you notice like the furnishing, the furnitures and the windows, they have to match that, that curvature of the tower, which is a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
And they just kind of got away from that evidently and just started building them square. It was cheaper, easier. I guess they got to the point when they really didn't care that much anymore about, the aesthetics.
Yeah. They built a number of square towers in this country too, of course, later in the 1800s. He also
I
asked,
think the Stevensons always, for all the generations, took great pride in their work. And I think they always had always made some special details as part of their designs.
oh yeah. He also asked, are Shetland ponies indigenous or brought over back in the mists of time from Scandinavia and adapted, acclimated? I was reading about them and I believe they were bred on the islands there, pretty sure.
They were bred on the islands, and actually they were, based on what I read, transported to different places from Shetland. Whether they were actually native to the Shetland Islands in history, I don't know.
Well, I think they were deliberately bred to some extent to be strong and, for hauling things and to be pack animals and so forth. And I think that happened at Shetland. So let's see, we have
The Shetland ponies they're extremely friendly. Number of our members, I got pictures of petting them and interacting with them, and their coat is extremely thick. The manes in their coat. I mean, you can see how they could survive a northern Scottish winter. I mean, they're really sturdy creatures.
Same thing with the sheep in Shetland, right? Which makes the wool so famous. They make a lot of things out of Shetland wool. We have Eve Edmund with their hand digitally has their hand up. So Eve, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone and go ahead and ask your.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So I have a couple of questions. One, did you spend the night in Inverness?
Whoop, don't hear you, Jeff.
Did you spend the night in Inverness?
Yes, one night.
Where did you stay?
It wasn't the most memorable of hotels. It was unfortunately something I almost think that we were booked at one hotel and something got screwed up and we had to switch at the last minute. And so the hotel we stayed at in Inverness was not that memorable. It was a bed and a shower, basically.
Actually,
certainly not like the Busta House. Yeah.
It was the Ramada Inn. Seriously, I got it right here. We stayed at the Ramada Inn, and it wasn't even a good one.
And it wasn't in Inverness. It was outside on the outskirts of town. And when we went shopping, they had to drive us in the coach to get to the was it in town? Oh, I've been corrected. It was in town. Excuse me. So.
Okay. Yeah,
this tour was only in 2007. It was just like yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I was there, in 1990, I think, or something like that. No, I don't know when. It was probably earlier than that, 80 something. But I can't remember. I was with a group and we stayed at kind of a hostel. But it was, I loved Inverness, and it was great, But of course, I was much younger then. So my another question was Loch Lomond. Did you stop there, or did you we went past it?
Yeah, pretty much, because
we didn't stop there.
On the way back from Oban, we went by there, but we didn't really spend any time with. That was the tail end of that tour, and it was we were a horse going back to the barn.
When we organized the trip, we really focused in on the islands. Seeing the northern part of the Scotland was kind of an add-on that we could do as we were heading south, getting back down to the airport. But I always said if we did it again, that we would definitely maybe add another day or two and extend that portion, because there's so much to see as you're heading back down to Glasgow.
Yeah, because that was the one thing I wanted. We didn't go to Loch Lomond on my tour, and I wish we had. We were supposed to, and then for some reason we didn't.
Were
And
you
the
going to
other
take
was
the high road or the low road?
the high
Uh-huh.
road.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, the jewelry maker. What's the name of the jewelry person?
Sheila Fleet.
How's that spelled? Like sweet? S-W-E-E-T?
F Fleet, like a fleet of ships.
Oh,
FL.
Fleet. Oh, Fleet. Okay.
And she's got a website, so just, I'm
Yeah.
not sure, probably Sheila Fleet, but
Check it
Beautiful,
out.
beautiful earrings and expensive but lovely. I still have my earrings and think about that trip and where I got them.
All right. Thank you.
SheilaFleet.com. I found the website, SheilaFleet.com jewelry.
Oh, all right. Thanks. Not that I need any more jewelry.
David McKee had a question in the chat. Did the USLHS interact with Northern Lighthouse Board directly to facilitate visits? How was the cooperation? I know in the 2017 tour down in southeastern Scotland, we went to the NLB headquarters in Edinburgh, which was fun.
Yeah, we did. We worked a lot with the National Northern Lighthouse Board. They've always been extremely accommodating and friendly, and they were the ones who helped us make the arrangements to meet the lighthouse keeper at North Ronald. We didn't mention this, but this gentleman came out in a full uniform, still tended the light on North Ronald. He lived there with his family. Had lunch with us at the observatory. We forgot to mention this, Skip, but when we had lunch out there at this observatory, they'd separated the group depending on what you ordered. So if you ordered mutton, you were at the mutton table, and if you ordered anything else, you were at the other table. So I forgot about that. Yeah, the Northern Lighthouse Board was fantastic, and they've always been great. As with Trinity House and the Commissioner's Irish Lights, just recently we've gotten some good responses from. So we've been doing pretty good with all of the most difficult I find that we've had to deal with has been the Italian Navy. Not that they're bad, but very difficult. They don't like to provide access to the lighthouses. I think did you have a problem in France, Skip? I think you did. You did okay in France last time in Brittany.
Yeah, but the thing is, a lot of those lighthouses that we went to there are open to the public in general. So we really didn't need, a lot of other permission. But I would like to say that, remember that the Northern Lighthouse Board also manages the lighthouses on the Isle of Man. And when we went there, they bent over backward, and we were able to get into every one of those lighthouses and climb them, which, we never, because they were all on private property. So they were extremely helpful for that tour.
Yeah. So looping back, the Northern Lighthouse Board was extremely cooperative, and they continue to be, and they love their lighthouses. That's for sure.
Yep.
We had another question. Caroline Wilkins asks, when did the Stevensons move to square design in place of the iconic round style? But I don't think the Stevensons did design any square lighthouses, unless I'm wrong about that.
I noticed that Kim Phelan's right on. Maybe she could answer that question for us. She knows everything about Stevensons, I think. Most things. No.
I think those came later than the Stevenson lighthouses. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, that's for sure. Let's see. Outsider Art again says Shetland. Oh, never mind. That's not a question. Oh, yeah, he does. He asks why round towers in the first place. That's an interesting question because I don't know if I've ever seen anything like official and anywhere saying why they built round towers, but it's my impression that the idea is that the wind blows around them more easily than with the square tower. So,
well, if you look at the ancient Roman towers in England and in other parts of Europe, they were all round, and they were stone. They had fires at the top. I don't have an answer to is why, but you might be right, Jeremy. If somebody comes up with that answer, let us know so we can broadcast.
Somebody gets a better idea. That's the best I can come up with. But most, like Jeff says, towers of all kinds, watchtowers, lighthouses, were pretty much round for centuries. Somebody's asking me privately, but I'll answer for everybody about accessing the podcast on Stitcher. She's asking, and I think it seems to me I tried to get it on Stitcher. There was some problem, so I'm not sure it's there, but it's available through all kinds of places like Spotify and again, any kind of smartphone app like Apple Podcasts and others. Just search for Lighthearted, 2 words, light space hearted.
Right, and you can go to the Society's website and you can, right on the very front, you can click on the most recent podcast homepage, and it'll pull you to the page that lists them all, and click them right on there from the Society's website.
That's right.
Mhm.
So, all right, so I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or elsewhere. So I think we're probably going to wrap things up very soon, but we're talking about asking if some people want to stay to chat. Is that?
Yeah, so if anybody who's on the tour wants to unmute themselves and kind of talk right now, we can do that for the next few minutes. And if anybody else who wasn't on the tour wants to listen and say hi, you can do that too. But we're not sure how it's going to work, but we're going to try to unmute everybody and see how it goes.
Just wait a second here. I just want to say, for anybody who's leaving now, thanks so much for being here today. And we don't know yet when we'll be doing the next one of these, but there will be more, and there'll be other programs as well. So thank you so much for being here.